Ryan, take it away.
Yeah, for sure. What's going on, everybody? Thank you all for tuning in. My name is Ryan Collins. I'm the executive director of the Midwest Writing Center. Thanks to Sarah for putting this together. We appreciate this. Um, we appreciate everybody tuning in. We appreciate Sarah putting this together a couple times a week. It is my great pleasure and privilege to talk to Brian Krans, one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite journalists, one of my favorite people. Brian, how's it going?
I am doing well here in lovely Oakland, California.
Right on. It is good to be talking to you across the time zones and across the vast expanse of the Western United States. So you do a lot of stuff, man. You are like all over the place, and doing a lot of journalism in a lot of different veins. Like, tell us a little bit of like, what are some of the things you got going on right now?
So writing wise, I've kind of, I pick and choose projects as they come. I mean, of course, I'm freelance, so I'm always like, who's paying? So for example, like I work at KCBS Radio as a writer. I can do it remotely, but that's writing live audio, live radio. It's 24/7 broadcasting. So that's the newest kind of writing I've got into, because it's, you know, you always want to tell people like write for the ear. Well, this is literally writing for the ear, and specifically like knowing what anchors I'm working with, so how they speak and whether or not you're like, oh my God, this person would use this word. And then also, I've been a health reporter for a long time, and we're in a pandemic. So currently I'm working with a nonprofit news site called the Oakland Side. They brought me on to help with their vaccine effort, keeping people up to date on what's going on. You know, we have a mass vaccination site at the Oakland Coliseum, which is supported by FEMA. And just people are just really confused about when's their time to get vaccinated, who qualifies, you know, and so that's kind of a rapid thing, you know, when we get appointments open up, trying to let people know when they can go get their shots. And then I'm continuing to cover the Vallejo Police Department for a variety of outlets. Most lately, I've been writing for The Appeal. They are it's a city of about 120,000 people. It's one of the most diverse cities in America. It's something they're very proud of, but they also have a lot of fatal police shootings. And a lot of the information that comes out of the department isn't exactly truthful. So recently there's been changes in California laws that have opened up a lot of records, you know, complete investigative files from some of these departments. So I'm going back, like my latest piece kind of looks at, there's like at least like 6 police killings in the last decade where the police officers said they saw a weapon, and there actually wasn't. Like it was, somebody was holding a wallet, somebody had a hammer, somebody just didn't have anything at all, and the police officers shoot and kill these people. And then in this department, they're more likely to get promoted than they are to get fired. So a lot of attention. That it's one of those departments, they just need sustained attention on them, and so that's been a lot of involving a lot of my time. So that's about where I'm at right now.
That sounds like it would involve a lot of several people's time. Yeah, and like some of it, you know, sounds like somewhat risky, or at least like high pressure, I guess, in terms of how some of that reporting might be received by the people being reported on and the communities in which those people live. What's it like writing? I mean, like I know you write a lot of other things too, and we'll get to some of that later. But like, what's it? What are some of the challenges in like doing journalism, writing journalism across like these different platforms, potentially for different audiences? You know, obviously you're covering a lot of different things, and you know, got your eyes on a lot of balls, all of them up in the air, it seems. So like, you know, where is there crossover? Where is there like added difficulty? Anything like that?
Well, you know, obviously writing about police officers that kill people and then don't get any repercussions, that is always in the back of my mind. Like months and months ago when I, I was looking into these guys, and then there was another police killing, and so we decided to, I decided like, all right, it's time to go. It's time to start doing this stuff. I did a 10-part podcast series about it, and that's always in the back of my mind. Like, I'm not gonna lie that sometimes when I step out of my, I look through the people before I step out my door just to make sure no one's hanging around. But it just when we're having all this racial reckoning in the country and everything, and this for me is one way to use my white privilege, is to write about this stuff. Like, I'm if a cop came up to my door and shot and killed a white journalist on his doorstep, that's there's going to be tons of people flocking to that. And there are a lot of people, family members of these people who have been killed, have been speaking out for years and not getting the attention that they deserve. So for me, it's a way to use that. And plus, the skills that I've had, I went to Berkeley, their grad program, and I did their investigative reporting. And, it's just one of those things where I guess for me, it's a justice issue, because like, if I don't, plenty of other people are covering this department and writing about, like Shane Bauer, who's a phenomenal reporter, had a fantastic piece in the New Yorker about this police department. And it's just one of those things is where, if history allows it to repeat itself, nothing will happen to any of these people, and they will be able to not only not get fired, but retire with a pension. And then we as taxpayers have to basically fund this state sanctioned homicide. So, and especially the writing aspect of it, it's and God bless fact checkers. That's all I have to say. But they're the ones that are going to make sure that, like, well, no, it wasn't a Saturday, it was a Sunday. It's all those little tiny things, because those little tiny mistakes, like if you follow my Twitter, that I'm just, it's just typos. It's everywhere. But it's one of those those little tiny errors that when they're like, oh, Brian Krans, he couldn't even get this right. So they just take that thread to like delegitimize you. So it's, from a writing standpoint, it's being very specific about language. One big thing in this is police departments always phrase it as an officer involved shooting. That didn't mean the cop got shot, because when a cop gets shot, they're immediately just like oh my gosh, so we don't use the term officer involved shooting. It's a police shooting or a police killing, so that's just a little part of the writing part in that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like that's not just like semantic, like these things mean differently. Like I would imagine, like, reporting on any sort of like municipal action, particularly like police or something like that, anything related to the law, particularly, I would imagine it's going to be pretty jargon filled, right? And there's probably like inherent sort of whether they're intentionally barriers, they're just barriers in terms of understanding, in terms of not only just for the public to understand what's going on, but for people like you to bring information to the public in a way that is like easily understood and accessible. So
Yeah, and
go ahead.
that's for it's all these complicated systems, and everybody has their own insider jargon, and it's important for people. Our jobs as writers are not to be just mouthpieces. We're not here to repeat things verbatim. Like case in point, here in California, we have issues with our power company when it comes to fire season, and they call them power safety shutoffs or something like that. And it's like, oh, the PSPS. And every time I always eliminate the word safety from it. Like every time I'm like, you don't get to call these safety. Like, no, you haven't invested in your own equipment. And now when it gets windy, one of these things falls over and then it kills people, and you claim it's safety related. Like, please don't, whether it's courtrooms, especially, there's lots and lots of jargon. Police are notorious for it. They have their own lingo, and even now when communicating information with the pandemic, it's never been more important to let people know, because like, you hop on Facebook and all of a sudden your uncle went from an elections expert to an epidemiologist. But it's just their way of taking that information and relaying like what's the most important thing. We just watched from this entire pandemic on just how language matters. Just the racist language our former president used to use, and now directly translating to an increase in violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Like, like this is it all of the words matter. And that's why, like, as writers, it's our job to not only like, take it back, but like also call people. I mean, like, the Associated Press finally was like, hey, it's okay to call things racist instead of racially tinged or racially motivated,
Right.
So it's like, thanks for the empowering AP, but like, how come we weren't able to call out racist stuff before?
Yeah, no, I mean that's yeah. I kind of remember when that broke. I actually thought of you and other people who who work do the work that you do. That seemed like a strange qualification to have to make. In the same way that yeah, I love what you're saying about like removing safety from that, because I feel like so often pandemic or non-pandemic, like the language of safety ends up being often more the language of plausible deniability.
Hmm.
And the people who are being kept safe often don't seem to be the people who the acronyms or the labels or whatever are intending to like make or keep or try to help be safe. It seems more like the people who are coming up with the acronyms themselves. um so yeah, so like you mentioned the podcast series that you did, which is really compelling, and I would encourage, we're gonna share the links to some of the stuff that Brian's been doing so people can check it out. um what's the difference between writing, like podcasts are huge, right? People are, of all stripes. I think, podcasts are probably one of the few things the pandemic has been good for, I guess. And I'm not exactly sure. I don't keep
Yeah.
up in that way. It certainly seems like they have not stopped or ceased proliferating. But in terms of writing for something like that, because I think a lot of people hear a lot of podcasts and like a lot of other mediums, they don't necessarily think writing immediately when whatever they're listening to. Like it sounds like either a conversation or just sort of like a recounting of something that's happened. Whereas like something like this sounds more like, deep investigative reporting, like well sourced, well fact checked. Um, it's just coming to us through the ear and not so much through the eye. Can you speak on like a little bit of the differences in terms of like both approach and execution for writing for something like a podcast series like that versus just like the freelance, not just, but the freelance writing that you do or have done for like Healthline or places like that?
Yeah, I mean, I I really like audio reporting. Video for me is it tells too much. That's one thing I like about writing, is that I'm like, cool, I can let this, depending, even in fiction, if I'm describing a character, like I get to choose what qualities I let the readers know about, and the rest they'll fill into their brains. Like if we all had to hang out and draw what we thought of a character looked like in almost any book, unless it's like, something that's overly described. But the nice thing is with audio writing, it's the ability to bring in a lot of it. So the first episode of the podcast series I did with Open Vallejo looked at the police killing of Sean Monterosa on June 2nd. This is all sorts of the country was just in turmoil following the killing of George Floyd, and these groups of cars were going around Vallejo, and they're breaking into places. They're it's some of it was protest, some of it was looting. I'll let people decide how they want to phrase it on that. But this 22-year-old kid was coming out of a Walgreens. A police officer, a team of police officers rolled up an unmarked police truck. They were still moving. They fired from the back seat of the windows, and they shot and killed this kid. And we have some decent transparency laws in California, so there was a certain time frame where they had to release this. So all of a sudden, I build up my elements of what I have. So I had police scanner traffic. I had police body cam videos that we received at like the last minute that we just stitched in real fast. And then we had all the sounds from the reoccurring from protests. First it started with George Floyd, and then they're like, oh my gosh, Vallejo just did the same thing again. So when I'm looking at it, I try to think of, you can, when writing a normal piece, you can just like, here's my quote, and then here's the next sentence afterwards. Well, in audio reporting, it's all about like how the person says something, and that's one thing I like about audio reporting, is that it's just like, okay, well, here's the quote. well, I would hear how that person said it, because sarcasm can come across. A lot of the times people, even when they're hurting, like they laugh when they're
Yeah.
uncomfortable. And so in doing that, it's a lot of it is looking at just the inflection and how things will come across. But that's also a challenge too, like, okay, cool. I want this quote to end like right here. Well, if you can hear the person's voice go up, like they're going to continue talking, like, oh man, okay, I got to rework this. And it's also like the software that I get to use. To really confess, like my favorite thing about audio reporting is that I have to leave. I have to go out, so there were all these, I mean, granted, covering large scale protests during a pandemic isn't like ideal for your personal health. But a lot of these protests I went to, like I was the only reporter there. And the presence of one reporter makes a difference on whether or not the cops are going to light these people up, so
for sure.
being there with this big giant microphone and like I have a GoPro and all this and a bag and a t-shirt that just says press on it, just being like, what's up, dude? Like, oh, okay, yep, now I'm shooting video, so it's like one of those, like, there's all the different things. But yes, like that's the one thing that I do like about at least the trends, the going from just being a strict like newspaper reporter to being an audio reporter. And like also like for budding freelance journalists, I can do a print version of a story and an audio version of the same story and get paid twice. So like FYI, like that's why.
That is excellent advice, and good to know. I can't say that I need that, but I'm not a freelance journalist, so then I probably wouldn't. I'm a freelance nothing. No, but I love what you're saying about like inflection and expression and the way that comes through, because like that's a problem I think inherent to any text, is that we don't get that right, and especially if it's someone who's an actual person who's being quoted, that sort of like auditory context matters, like in how we understand. Like if you were talking to them in person, like that would translate in a way that maybe just the quote itself doesn't always. Word choice does not always communicate tone, and things like that. So having that extra element, and the other thing, like just that combination of sources, like I do not do writing as meaningful as the kind of journalism that you do, but as a poet and creative writer and someone who just loves to like mess around with language, like I love that idea of like being able to bring in multiple sources and multiple formats, right? Not just like multiple texts or like a voice recording, but like being able to manipulate and not manipulate, but utilize all of these different sources and maintain them like in context and bring them into one place and sort of have them interact. It seems like a more, even though like I get what you're saying about it not, the visual maybe giving away too much, or maybe over defining a story, or having the potential to sort of like over crystallize, I guess, in the viewer or reader's mind, what they're understanding. I'm thinking about the juxtaposition of an image versus like what the report attached to that image might say. Right. And like how there might be like it's easier, I think we're more prone to sort of, especially when we're reading on a format like this and looking at screens, it's maybe easier to like see that visual content and be like, oh, headline, visual, I understand. Whereas like the real understanding, the real reporting, the sourcing, the information that we really need is a little bit further down the line. So being able to sort of like remove that element, for me, listening to stuff like that focuses my concentration a lot more. So I feel like when I listen to things like that, I'm getting a little bit more out of it even than I would if I was just reading it. So I just personally, I dig that. And hopefully, yeah, I mean, hopefully it gives people a fuller picture and makes these stories more alive, because yeah, you said June 2nd, right? I mean, that's like right in the middle of everything, when everything was kind of starting to pop off nationwide. So like, I can't imagine. And yeah, the pandemic layer is another layer. It's the omnipresent layer, it feels like, for everything that we do now.
I will say one of the greatest things to happen to because of the pandemic, at least, is the ability for people to attend public hearings remotely.
Yeah.
This big thing is civil engagement. And Vallejo had a huge problem with this. And this was one of my favorite things I was able to do, at least when it came to accountability, was so their city council and their city attorney decided, like, okay, we'll have people email in questions. And then they had a city staffer read them, which you could just hear the level of discomfort in her voice when she's just like, okay, defund the police. You guys are all bastards. Okay, next one, and but then all of a sudden the city decided, hey, you guys email us your statements, and then we're gonna silently read them to ourselves, which is not how civil engagement is supposed to be. I mean, if you haven't participated in a city council meeting, or God bless them, a school board meeting, like, that's just heatedness. It is just rawness. Some of the greatest and strangest people show up to these kind of meetings. But so they finally, like, and also, like, I was being selfish because I'm an audio reporter, and the sound of a city council just reading something to themselves is horrible. So we pressured them, like, hey, they might be violating these open meeting laws and stuff like that. So they finally allowed people to call in, which is still a hot mess because then it's everybody are you there? Your turn. But it does allow people, because you'll hear people in the background, just like you hear a kid running around, it's like the ability to be like, yeah, like, I'm busy. I may not have time to go down to City Hall to discuss something that's important to me and have to wait for 3 to 6 to 8 hours, like however long these meetings go. So the ability of people just being like, no, I got my laptop ready. Like, no. Like, okay, your turn to speak. All right, yep, defund the police. Thanks. Bye. Just watching the level of community engagement, and community organizations that really put all their time and effort into this. And that, for me, like, being present and covering all this stuff, it's a way for, it's just an important period of time. I mean, like, to think, like, imagine how we're going to explain this to future generations, where it's like, hey, there was a guy in Minneapolis and a cop kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes. He even looked directly into the camera, kind of knowing nothing was going to happen. And then, despite a global pandemic, the entire nation went insane. But then we have to explain to the kids, well, so what happened? Like, oh, nothing. We didn't do anything. No, everybody just, but even now.
Yeah, we had a bunch of uprisings and everybody just went home.
Yeah, it's a sustained outrage. And that's why, as a reporter, it's always just trying to be like, all right, cool, what's going on? What's the next thing? What levels? But even now, I mean, as somebody who covered criminal justice for so long, I'm just really, I'm really liking how people are exploring the role of the district attorney that they play in society. And it kind of just like, oh, wait a minute, the district attorney, well, they're funded, they get all these campaign contributions from the police departments that they're in charge of. And then they depend on a police officer's testimony to put away bad guys. But then when it's the police officer kills a person, just, oh yeah, oh, they were afraid for their life. There you go. Boom. Say the magic words. Oh, you're afraid for your life. Okay, great. Cool. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Back to work you go. So at least for me, like, using whatever skills I have, whatever format, it's being out there. And most importantly, it's also like checking my own personal biases on where these things stand. Who do I quote? Where they go in the story. It's all an important part, and it's always just, double checking to make sure, to stand back and take a look and just being like, what's going to be the impact of this? Like, could it have the opposite effect of what I want? And then always, like, I find one of the most important things I do as a journalist is that the second my story goes live, I send the link to all the sources on both sides, so that if I did get something wrong, I can correct it immediately before that it continues to spiral out. So.
Right. And man, that right there, I mean, and just like that willingness. So I teach at a university. I teach composition English and things like that. We talk a lot about info literacy, and like that sort of willingness to correct yourself, that kind of like intellectual humility. Like, it's part and parcel to journalism, right? Like that willingness to go back and correct the record and make things clear. Like, that's important. But I wish that would bleed more into just our regular society. And like, it's one thing that like the few students that I do get to work with, I try to make really clear that like that kind of stuff is not an academic exercise so much as it is like an accountability for what you're putting out in the world, an accountability to like, being a good actor in your community in terms of like what you're sharing, how you're sharing it, making sure that what you're sharing is like as accurate as it can be, as opposed to just like, yeah, like you said, sort of amateur YouTube investigative reporting that sometimes happens and has a tendency to like spread a little bit quicker than I think anybody we would that we would like to see. So yeah, that is valuable to hear. How, yeah, it's pandemic things. How's the pandemic going? I mean, you're obviously like super productive, and you've obviously been doing reporting relating to the pandemic, but just in terms of like your writing practice, professional, and anything else, like how's the pandemic been for that?
Yeah, how's the pandemic going? Thankfully, I have my vaccine appointment tomorrow, so that's nice. It's whatever. I'm just curious to see is like once I'm fully vaccinated, just be like I'm still wear your mask and everything, but I will confess like this has affected so many people economically. How many people have lost someone? I thankfully have not lost anyone to it. I did have my brother-in-law got COVID kind of early on. This is when all the rich people were fleeing to their ski cabins to try to outrun the virus, and all they did was that they gave it to the local people who had to wait on them. I mean, he pulled through. But it was immediately just realized like, yo, this is no joke. And he's not that much older than me. He had to be hospitalized. So, that just when all these people were saying like, oh, it's not real, it's not this, like I couldn't punch people through Facebook fast enough. But I mean, I was lucky, like I'm a freelance journalist. And so already they're like, oh, we're not going to the office. Like I stopped going into KCBS, the newsroom. Then I can do my job from home. And immediately I was just like, I probably saved $1,000 in just parking tickets from last year. But yeah, I mean, so when it came to
linings.
Yeah, people were just like, they're freaking out like, oh, I don't know what to do. And I was like, my office is my detached garage downstairs. I already had a recording studio set up there for doing podcasting. All I basically had to do was just like, all right, well, I had this podcast set up for up to 4 people at once. Like, well, all this can go into a box. But the oddest thing was I was just like immediately, it's like, all right, cool. I've been a health reporter. I've done in-depth dives into antibiotic resistance. I've pissed off the anti-vax crowd. Like, I mean, honestly, I should be doing it more, but whatever. They're smart. They do their own research.
Yeah, right. I was just going to say.
And so immediately I was just like, wow, I'm going to be so busy. I'm just going to be incredibly busy because nope, everyone else became a health. Like you just saw people that had no experience covering this stuff and they're going out. And I was like I'm watching some of the news. I was like, ooh, that's not what you mean. Like even now when they're like, oh, there's a new variant of COVID-19 out there. Like, no, there's not. There's a new variant of the coronavirus. And like, these are different. And just people trying to be like, all right, like, how does this work? Like, so what's the difference between coronavirus and COVID? Well, what's the difference between HIV and AIDS? Like, come on, like we have all this. And so, yeah, it was interesting watching that. But yeah, I mean, it was also like, it was a really panicky time. I remember being in the newsroom and it was all of a sudden, if you're sitting there, all of a sudden it's like, President Trump declares a travel ban. That's not news. He likes doing that. He just likes telling people where they can and can't go. But it was like, oh, the NBA is canceling its season. There's that one game like, hey, everybody, you need to leave. You're not in danger.
Yeah.
But just,
thanks for showing up. Everything's fine, but everyone needs to leave immediately in an orderly fashion. Yeah, I was watching that game. Mm-hmm. That was wild.
And then Tom Hanks. and we're just like, that's it.
That was a
Like
wrap.
this
That was a wrap.
is not a joke.
That's
like,
where a lot of people got serious. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
it got the Hanks. But it was also like, so like I'm constantly, watching the news. I'm doom scrolling regularly. I literally had to stop myself because like I'd learn a new piece of information and I'd come back upstairs and there's my wife in the kitchen. I was like, and then this, and she's like, Jesus God, stop it, stop. I was like, okay, all right,
We
I need
did,
to.
yeah, we did some of that to each other, I think, like, because I started working from home and we would be in separate rooms and it would just be like, did you read this thing? Did you read this thing? And yeah, I think we were just kind of like snowballing with each other more than sort of, but neither of us being professional journalists. So like, but like and like the word choice thing, like it seems so simple, right? Like I think this is like one of the things about just language in general, like high stakes, low stakes, anything like that. Like word choice matters, and like figuring out the active word. And like when we were prepping for this a little bit, we talked about, like a study showing versus a study suggesting, right? You were talking particularly about headline writing and like, like what I was saying earlier about image, headline, and for a lot of people, that's all the expertise they need to glean from whatever they may have been looking at. So like those headlines become especially important, despite the fact that they are still trying to be a hook, if not clickbait, depending on the market and depending on who's writing them, I would suppose. But like, can you like that sort of thing? Like, because if someone says, if someone sees like this study shows this and the understanding that leads to, that's a far different thing than suggests. And I think like for most people, the active word or the most important word in that headline would be study or vaccine or COVID. It's not, it's the verb like you're talking about. So can you speak on that a little bit as someone who writes both content and headlines?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's always, there is the natural urge because, clicks drive advertising, how you get your bills paid. Like, so don't get me wrong. Like, I wish there was a way to have media without advertising and things would be different. It's the same imposed language that people throw on their things, exclusive, scoop. Like I've had stories where like I was literally just covering this story on Twitter. Like it was a trial in Vallejo. It was the last, governor declares, World Health Organization pandemic, governor shut everything down. And this judge was like, let's keep going. Let's keep this jury trial going. So much that the head judge in the state had to be like, you're done. And like I was sitting there tweeting about it live from the courtroom, and then another reporter shows up. She files her story, and it's like exclusive. I was like, "Oh, is it exclusive? Cool." Like I wasn't. You only know about it but whatever. Cool. Anyway, that's my personal grudge. I'm gonna be okay with this.
So cool. We got room for that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's specifically like science reporting and the issue of research and how there's a study that was it peer reviewed? Was it like where is it? And a lot of the times, like especially in a rapidly moving pandemic, where at first they're like, you don't need a mask. Well, why were they saying that? Well, because people were buying up all the masks that we needed to give to the people working in the COVID units. And now they're literally just being like, actually, pretty much anything over your face is better than nothing. And now they're like, 2 masks. It's like, okay, why? Well, the messaging there is like, and then, the people that are against masks ran with it. Like, as soon as we 3 masks, as soon as we 4 masks, as soon as it's going to be this, just like, no, it's just the seal. It's just the seal. That's all it is, and it's trying to relay the messaging in a calm way where, and that's the only problem is when you're doing that, and then people will just double back. Well, before you said this, and before you said this, and before, well, why? Like, like even explaining the very beginning, like we refer to it as the novel coronavirus. I have written novels. It's like, ooh, what is this? Like, no, novel as in we have not seen this before. Like we should have just, okay, everybody, there's a virus that we don't know how it behaves. We don't have adequate treatments for it. And y'all want to go to spring break. So, and that's a lot of the times where it is when even just writing like an article for Healthline, I was former senior writer at healthline.com, and they went through a lot of growing pains. I'm like, all right, if you just, we had one guy one time was like, actually, if you spell this drug wrong, will show up. If you purposely put in a typo, it'll show up better in Google when people misspell the name of the drugs. And we're just like, nah, we're not doing that. Those are cheap tricks. This is health information. People
Needs to be, yeah.
It's people that are either reading it or either recently diagnosed, caring for someone, or someone who's just like an OG and like owning their space. They know their condition, like so. So a lot of the times it is. So when you're looking at a study, you can do these like one-off stories, just being like, is coffee or chocolate good or bad for you? Like, here's the next study. Here's the next study. And some of those are cute because it's like, I was just going to eat chocolate anyway, but now I'm trying to take care of myself. And fine, like that's good. But there is that constant back and forth with people, and it's also explaining science, just being like, as you were just talking about, like how, admitting mistakes, admitting you weren't right. Like I think one of the most comforting things someone could teach themselves is like, there will always be more out there that I don't know than what I do know. There always will be that.
100%.
And the ability to just be like, well, one, not always sit like, this is exactly the way it is, and this is 100%. Just be like, nah, because you're not going to be able to change those people's minds. Like,
right.
There's no article I'm going to write if somebody is 100% convinced that the coronavirus isn't real and that masks don't do anything other than to muzzle people in the gentle, violent takeover of their rights. Like, there's nothing I'm going to be able to write on that.
Right.
But might I be able to write an article that might get someone in their vicinity to kind of just be like, all right, cool, but like, we're not going to go to McDonald's and scream at somebody making minimum wage because they make you put on a face mask, and it's even the same conversations I have with my family. They're just like, well, you can't breathe wearing those masks. I was like, I run wearing a mask. And
you don't breathe when you run.
Yeah, apparently.
Maybe you're magical. I don't know.
No, I mean, and then that's it, because it is those headlines and those little bits, like those are the ones that get taken away. Those are going to be the ones you see in the crazy do your own research YouTube videos, where they're just like, oh, there's this headline. I've had that happen where it's like, there's a headline and then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my byline. I go, oh, they didn't read that article. They just scoured to find, something in their self-serving prophecy. And, as for lack of a better term, communicators and storytellers, like we do have to have that moment where you take a step back and just be like, how is this going to be received?
Yeah.
Even like a stupid tweet, I'm like, no, I'm just not even, no, not worth it.
Not today, Satan. Yeah. I like one of the things, I mean, I find it valuable as a teacher, like that practice in journalism, that constant like openness and transparency and willing to revise, or at least from reputable markets, right? From reputable writers. But like, it would have been nice. And I think it would have, imagining a different reality, but like if and I think this is true in general, but particularly like in a situation that's high stakes, like a global pandemic where people are dying, that having top-down communication that is clear that like, look, this is novel, this is all new. Every day there's probably going to be new information. Information's going to get like, just like a reminder to the citizenry, community, people at large, that things change, that information is updating constantly, right? Because it's so easy to want an ending, or it's so easy to want certainty, right? When is this going to be over? Give me a deadline when I can not be in pandemic time anymore, or like, give me something that's going to work 100%. Like, do masks work or don't they? And it's this either or thing, as opposed to thinking of things on a spectrum, or thinking of things as maybe both and just this reluctance to acknowledge that information and things change, situations change, they have to be revised, and like communicating that is one thing, I think, but part of what top-down leadership can do to aid that communication and make it more effective is to communicate that simple kind of idea. And obviously, I think last year that was completely absent from any sort of top-down communication that we got, and that I don't think, and it gives cover to people who are just going to be unreasonable and not listen to like science and factual reporting as it's presented. And it gives them an easy out, I guess. So that is, I think, hopefully something people can take away with and like broadly apply in their lives.
I just think, I mean, enough people celebrate enough, but like Dr. Anthony Fauci, like, right? there's just the memes of him just like, oh God, like when your own health experts, and just the happiness and freedom he had stepping out onto the podium under the current administration. And he's like, oh, okay. But there's still going to be people like I have my shitty uncles that's been like, oh, Fauci's just taking money and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But that's I've watched people, people just being in the covering healthcare space and just talking about how science communication. And I'm not a scientist. And a lot of the times I just try to be in explaining a lot of this stuff. I just try to be like 100% forward with my sources. I'll call them up.
Yeah.
I'll just be like, hey, you're an expert. Do you have time to talk? They're like, sure. And I was always just like, we are not, I don't write for the medical crowd. I don't write for this. I just write people who want information to be able to base decisions off of. We're not giving medical advice, but just being like, so, just being like, all right, here's a study. What does it mean? And I just did the last one and they're like, oh, it's a decent study, but it doesn't really add anything that we don't already know.
Right.
I was like, cool, great. That's what I want. I'm not trying to blow up the study to make it seem like it's something more than it's not. Just being like, oh, here's a thing. We have here's another new thing. Here's where we're at, and then always don't forget to talk to your doctor. But I mean, that's also an important thing in the communication is being honest about what you do and do not know, and you'll hear that a lot in like breaking news on just being like, well, this is what we know so far, and that's always important. And especially like, I don't know, when it comes to like say stuff from the police, I'm always just like, the police say, case in point, we had out here in the East Bay, in one of the more affluent areas, we had a coyote. He just attacked the guy who was like stretching to run, and the coyote just attached himself on the leg. And I was like, oh my God. Well, and then he did it again. And this coyote attacked like 5 people. And we were kind of just like, all right, yo, like food chain wise, someone needs to take this coyote out. Like, I don't want the dogs getting any idea. I don't want the dogs seeing this, like, oh, we can attack them. Like, no, you can't. So the other day, the police were like, we got him. They captured him and euthanized, and they had done DNA testing to say like this is the same coyote. But even like as I was like rewriting it for on air, there was just that skepticism, and I'd just be like, a coyote, the police say, bit fun people. It's always just like that skepticism of just being like, yeah, because like I wasn't there, and
you're being both accurate and humorous all at once.
That coyote did not have a trial. I just want to point that out.
I mean, yeah, and like, but they can be. That's what I mean by both and. Like, obviously, there are contexts and situations where, like, the humorous aspect of that may be inappropriate, may not be necessary, may be a bad idea, but not all of the time. Especially coming off of like such a terribly interesting year, full of terribly interesting, terrible things that are beyond serious. I look forward to more reporting that might be like slightly more lighthearted about, I don't know, any damn thing, I guess. Truly, I don't care. Human interest story. Squirrel climbs tree, stashes nuts. More at 6.
I'm looking out my windows. If I see someone like pick up a piece of litter that isn't there, I'm like, oh, that's an 8-pager. Let's go. I want your full story.
Oh man. Well, hey, speaking of storytelling, we have to at least touch on a little bit. Over your left shoulder, I believe, would be a stack of books. Yes, they're pointing. Yes, you are also and Sarah is coming back with the full display. You're a novelist. That's kind of how we met back yonder. I remember reading your bylines for the illustrious Dispatch Argus in Rock Island, where I live. And I remember seeing these posters for this new book, A Constant Suicide, and I was like, I gotta meet this dude. This book looks cool. That's a cool title. And then now here we are. Have you been writing anything outside of like the sphere of journalism?
I mean, I have like over the years, like I had a friend that like, hey, we're putting together a horror series. based off of the states, and could you write something about Wisconsin because that's where you're from? And I was like, I'm gonna write a horror version of the Hodag, and I got like a prompt, and it was always like, it's the writing world, so it's like, did I get paid for that? No. Was it so much fun that I didn't want money? Yes. But like because like a lot of this stuff for this, and hopefully if it's useful, it's not just the talking about what we're writing about, but the act.
Yeah.
Like my buddy Travis Hulse, who had put it the best way, and excuse my language a little bit, but he said the act of writing is putting ass to chair. That's what it is. It's sitting down and being like, hey, I'm not like, I did the most writing. Was the most productive writer when I was in a house, when I was in places that didn't have Wi-Fi. I mean, it's ubiquitous now, but I had 2 places in the Quad Cities where like I didn't have Wi-Fi, which was great because like that's what I wanted. Like I was on the computer all day. I just want to come home. And then they invented the iPhone and whatever. It ruined me.
And it's been a wrap.
But yeah, so like the last book I wrote was Assault Rifles and Pedophiles. That came out in 2014. I did a tour, which was life-changing. But like, even when I was on the tour, I had the idea for my next book. I was writing it. I was researching it. I was going to different bookstores. Like, cool, I need this. I need. I was on it. But then I came back home. I think I had maybe $300 left in my bank account. And of course, what did I do? I bought this microphone right here and a pair of headphones, and I started a podcast about rollerblading. So I am very good at not making money. But outside of like maybe 4 months, I haven't had a regular gig. Even when I moved to San Francisco, I got a job working I was basically a sous chef in a kitchen, and even then it was 40 hours a week. Here are my set hours. So when I went home, like I wanted to write because I had the security of knowing like, here's how much money I have. So that's when I was able to finish my second book during that. But so it's like now when I'm just like, I'm writing, I'm proud of, I'm able to like make a decent living in the Bay Area. But like, let's face it, without my wife's health insurance, I'd be a ruin. So like, note to writers, marry up. I can't say I would survive on my own. But yeah, so I haven't, so like at the end of the day, like when I'm done with stuff, like, and a lot of like, it's like I'm writing about the worsening pandemic. At least now it's like, hey, it's getting a little bit better. Writing about the worsening pandemic, police violence, everything like that. It's so hard for me to sit down and just be like, oh, here's something that's going to take years to work on, which is, sad, which is honestly, it is what it is. Cause it's like,
oh, it's a ton of work, man, to write. I mean, writing any book, I think that's something that's a good reminder for anybody. We get a lot of people coming to the writing center and like, it seems like they don't actually know, but they have this idea that it's not that much work. It's so much work. Any book, I think, is so much work.
It's
right?
3 more books than I've written and 1 more book than he's written.
No, and I mean I absolutely enjoy them. I love the fact that, and I mean, I'm a geek. Anytime people have like these book setups, anytime I see any of them, and I was like, like as a friend, like, I'm on the shelf, like, and I mean, if anything, which I feel like I'm letting my fans, my friends and family down by like, when are you going to write a new book? But like, my greatest achievement that I've been able to do is like, I write these books, like people, they read them and then they just, they're like, I haven't liked reading since high school. Cause you get assigned books that just, they're not going to hit you. Like, right. They don't hit you at the right time. And then all of a sudden reading seems like a chore. So I really enjoy when people are just like, hey, I had one of my buddies, like, he's like, you're not writing books fast enough. Who do you recommend? And I was just like, all right, let's get you on some Vonnegut. Let's get you on a little bit of Bukowski. Let's get you on some Chuck Palahniuk, like those routes where it's like, oh, it's okay. Like I can get you. But that's the only thing is they see now reading as something more enjoyable. And that's my trophy that I carry. And that's why I wish I was like, they're like, when's the next book? I was like, man, I mean, even case in point, like I was in grad school when the 10th anniversary of A Constant Suicide came out. And I went through it. I was like, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to redo it. Like, I'm not going to change a whole lot.
Right.
but just tone it up a little bit.
Sure.
And that
You've learned a lot since then.
Yeah, and that 10-year anniversary just completely lost it. And that's why I'm just like, oh man. And I realized, just being like, when was my last book came out? Like I think I came out with 4 books in like 7 years. And and now the universe is saying 0 books in 7 years.
That's no, and that's not true. And I mean, like, it's all writing practice, right? It's all, and like all of your books are informed by reporting that you've done, life experiences that you've had. And I think like that's another thing too. Like when people, I was just in a workshop earlier this week where we were talking about not setting up writing goals that are going to be ultimately self-defeating. Like I'm going to write 5 times a week, and then you do that for a couple of weeks, just like exercise, right? And then you do that for a couple of weeks, and the 3rd week comes along and it's busy or whatever, and you miss a couple of days, and you start to get in that, oh, I didn't, I'm coming up short. And you start beating yourself up, and eventually it becomes a chore, and it becomes a chore that you don't want to deal with, and it becomes a chore that you associate with some kind of like shame or something like that. And then it's a wrap. You're probably, not only are you not having a writing practice, you're probably not going back to a writing practice or a reading practice or anything like that. So like, I always think it is worthwhile to remember, like, my uncle used to say, do something for your writing every day. And that could be reading. Well, I think most of the time that's reading, quite honestly. Could be reading, could be revising, could just be walking around and being aware of the world. Could be reading some excellent investigative journalism. But like, if you didn't do the work that you do as a journalist and as just as a human being, you wouldn't have those 3 books. You wouldn't have the 3 novels that you do. Fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because like all my books are parts of my experience, and then I just embellish, like case in point. So freeze tag on the highway, kids at summer camp, and we were on I was with the skate church kids, and we are on our way to New Orleans to do some recovery work. That's like 2 years after Katrina, so this is about like 07 probably.
Yeah.
And one of the older kids was like helping one of the younger kids, and it's just like one of the, he's like running around all crazy and everything. And she was like, oh God, I forgot to give him his medication. And I was just like, this is what happens if you don't give the medication. And I'm like, and that just popped into my head, like, what would you do with all that extra medication? And I went right to my notebook and just like, okay, here's, yep. Okay, summer camp, guy purposely takes the medications from the kids get to run around and just be insane. Okay, cool. And, assault rifles and pedophiles, it has a part of the title that's pedophile is directly from a court case that I covered. And this was one of my favorite writing moments. So this is a hard thing for me. I've had so many great writer moments. It's really hard to go back because I know I can't recreate them. So I remember I was covering this case. It's a federal child pornography case. And the guy was not charged with just possessing. He was charged with making it. And he represented himself and decided part of his defense was to play part of the tape. And as a reporter, I had to watch it. And that was the first time ever in my life that I went directly from the newsroom directly to the bar. And I remember it was just that I was just drinking scotch and I had my notebook out and I was just writing because I was like, all right, how do I process this? And so my only way to do it was to think of, all right, what if that kid was old enough to testify? And so I remember writing it. And I remember you showing up to the bar like, hey, what are you doing? And I was like, I saw the worst thing ever and I'm writing a story about it. And you're like, hey, we're having a reading. Why don't you come on by? Oh, was that a tonal shift? I remember this guy was like, he wrote a poem about a ship he'd been working on for like the last decade. There was this really wonderful, heartwarming story about a woman like, dropping the turkey at Christmas or something and it's sliding across the floor and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's nice. And I was like, oh, that was cute and heartwarming. With a belly full of scotch, I'm just like, you're like, oh, why don't you have Brian read this? And I was just like, I just got up there and I was like, I just remember saying, I go, today I saw the worst thing I've ever read, ever seen, and now I'm going to read about it. And this is notebook. This has not been edited. This is just pure raw. And I don't remember like looking up from the page the whole time, just being like, let's just get through this because I have trauma and now you're going to have trauma and that's healthy. And I just remember reading it and like, at the end, just looking up, and they're like two women like crying. They're like, great. Now, thanks for the trauma. But I just remember like when I was leaving, and like two women, I think they were romance novelists or something like that.
Yeah.
But they came up afterwards and they're like, oh my God, you need to meet our agent. I was like,
Pretty successful, very successful romance writers, actually.
yeah, they were love. And actually, I remember like going to or speaking with their agent, and they were just like, no. But it was still like the most
You
like
don't write romance. Like,
just raw, like writing a newspaper story, and then like hours later somebody's like, I need to introduce you to, you know, your agent. And like, that would never happen in Oakland or San Francisco, or, you know, like they had like Litquake. I applied Litquake every year, and they're like, get out of here. I was like, man.
really?
Oh yeah.
Oh man, sleep at the wheel. Come on, can't you have Green Apple vouch for you or something like that, man?
I got to do a reading at Green Apple, and that was so much fun. Like that was the great thing out here. There are some phenomenal bookstores, and they're all just like, you know, they're like, yeah, dude, you're local? Sure. Yeah. What do you want to do? And I'm well, because it also doesn't help. Like, I'm just like, hey, can I do a reading? They're like, I'm like, I don't want to, you don't have to pay me. They're like, come on in.
Yeah, no, that always helps for sure.
Mhm.
Green Apple is a books and music store in the Bay Area, which if you are ever there, if you're there right now, you should definitely frequent and support. They're super dope. No, I remember that, man. I remember that quite vividly. That was when we used to be at our old location, in our first location in Rock Island, very near the bar that you spoke of, and very near where we both lived. Or where you lived, where I would later live not too long after that.
Oh yeah,
Man, this
is a
is
great area.
yeah, dude, that was and that I wish more things like I wish there were more referrals to agents happening at our events. Writers who attend our events that aren't virtual, I guess. We've had one of those in the past year. One. We've had a lot of these though. Yeah, please shut that out. We'd be happy to make connections. Dude, this is so great, man. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your generosity. What should we be looking for from you next? Like, what do you got working on now? Like, where can we find you?
Oh God, who knows?
What's the next thing?
When I get that COVID vaccine, God knows what's going to happen. I might become a AI bot controlled by Bill Gates, which it's a joke, people. It's a joke. It's not going to happen. No, I mean, I feel, I mean, I've always been, you know, I used to have like just being, oh, I'm gonna go work for the New York Times, but like I still, I'm so diehard local news. So yeah, working with the Oakland side right now is really great. As soon as I get done with this, I have to update our vaccine guide. You know, it's getting people the resources. Like, here's all these different languages. You can call this phone number in. You know, I'm going around town and literally putting up flyers for a number where people can text us and get updates on things that are going on.
Right on.
You know, just understanding so people can know, like, where do I get this vaccine? How do I sign up? You know, even monitoring a Twitter bot that shows when appointments are available, and then being able to like pow, 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 pow. But there's so many communities, so many people out there that are doing this kind of stuff, you know, and just even going around, like, as I'm delivering the posters, there's always somebody that stops and just like, hey, what's that for? And I'm like, it's for the vaccine. And it's literally having one-on-one conversations about people. You know, people were just like, well, I heard, you know, because at the Coliseum one day they found out that they weren't giving people enough of the shot. But when I talked to the woman, she's like, yeah, I heard that they gave people the wrong thing. Like, what were they giving them? And I was like, no, it was still the vaccine. Because they were just afraid, like, what kind of magical devil juice did they inject people with? And I'm like, these people aren't being irrational. It's just, this is where they're getting their information.
Right.
So for me, like, I'm actually really proud of just doing this vaccine guide, just so people have one place to go, you know, that we can keep them completely up to date, and knowing that the more people have accurate information and they have access to there's no ads, there's no paywalls, there's nothing. It's non-profit local news, which for me is like, that's talking dirty to me. That's dirty talk. I love it. And so, but just a place to be able to, anyway, so if you go to the oaklandside.org, you can find the guide there. I'm working with them to do a whole bunch of other stuff. You know, we want to talk to people about why they got the shot. Because there's just,
Yeah, for sure.
the vaccine hesitancy are just people that are just like, hey, you know, how did we get this vaccine so fast? But well, actually, they've been working on these types of vaccines for a long time. You know, and I've known people that have been doing this type of vaccine research, and
For sure.
you know, so yeah, it's just continuing on that fight. You know, is just to make sure people get enough to make an informed personal choice, and then to get the shot when they need it. You know, just reminding people it's free. They're not, you know, even if you have a health condition, you don't have to show your health records. Most importantly out here, they're not checking your documentation status. Like the records are kept on paper. Like get your shot and get out of there, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a lot of, you know, that's no big project right now. But I do have something come out for the Peel that does look at the Vallejo Police Department, how 6 officer involved shootings, which is not all of them, 6 officer involved shootings in the last decade may have had is what I call imaginary weapons. And I mean, spoiler alert, no one got fired. Well, no, one guy got fired, and then people got promoted and stuff. So those are the 2 ones that I'm working on. And, you know, if anything, you know, it's still survival mode, which I know a lot of people are in. And I guess whatever, I'm, you know, by not having written, you know, I have all this time at home, I should have had 3 books written by now. You know, I shouldn't have had this. And there might be a lot of writers out there that are just like, hey, you know, like I feel worthless. Just be like, guess what? You're in the club. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
don't worry. Like this has been extremely chaotic, you know. I've been doing a lot of writing. I'm just not sharing it with anyone because that's how I became a writer, is just by journaling and trying to make sense of chaos. So yeah, I just really encourage other writers that if they are in any way intimidated by a blank page, then walk away from it. Take care of yourself, you know, and don't worry, like write on your own terms.
Yeah, I want to second that emotion for sure. Like I've seen it both ways. I've seen some people that have been like, oh, I've been writing so much, and I've seen some people that are like clearly getting to a point where they're starting to be like, man, I haven't done anything in however long. Take care of you first, man. The writing will always be there. The page is always there. The screen is always there. It'll be there when you're ready for it, when you need it. Better to take care of yourself than to try to take care of that. So, man, thank you so much, man. We appreciate the time. I'm going to kick it back over to Sarah and let her kind of wrap things up and do her host-like duties. But thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Brian. I put so many beautiful quotes and some funny ones in our chat. My favorite, of course, was the act of writing is putting your butt in the chair. It's excellent. And the 2 things, the last 2 things you 2 said, if you're intimidated by a blank page, walk away. It'll be there when you're ready for it. Those are, I mean, I don't think that I'm particularly letting my art suffer too terribly much, but those are really important things to hear. Thank you so much for coming on. And just so you can't get out of it now, Brian Krans agreed to come back, so you'll see him again. Now he can't get out of it. It's been announced to the public. I've got receipts. I also threw in the chat, we've got links to his store, so you can buy his books for 1 cent each. There's also some other merch there on Rocktown Press. I put the link to the vaccine guide for Alameda County. I think that that's useful, even if we're not, you know, in Oakland. I can see it being very, very useful. It's been a delight to see you 2 in conversation, and it's really, really great to see you in general. It's been a while. Now is the part where if you're taking off, we hope that you write more light into your life. Otherwise, we've got updates from the Midwest Writing Center. Brian, you can give us updates.
Okay, sure. So if you are living in the Quad Cities, the 6-county service area of the Quad Cities, what is that? That's Henry, Mercer, and Rock Island County in Illinois, Scott, DeWitt and Clinton in Iowa. We are accepting poetry submissions for a little National Poetry Month project that we're doing in partnership with Dead Poets Espresso in Moline. You can send one poem to us, one poem and one poem only. It's free to submit. We're displaying some of the poems down there. We're also hoping to maybe like put some of them up online. We're also hoping that some of the contributors will maybe participate in some readings that we have coming up. That would all be very dope. If you are 15 to 19 years old, or you know anyone who is in that same Quad City area, or really kind of anywhere, because we do this program virtually, so you can kind of tune in for most any damn place. Our Young Emerging Writers Summer Internship Program, which is how I met Sarah, which Brian and I led one year, I believe in 2008, which is just seems like an extraordinary long amount of time.
Both.
Yes. We are taking applications for that. We'll be taking applications through most of the month of May, so check that out. If you live in Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, or Minnesota, we are taking applications for the Great River Writers Retreat. We are hoping to host a writer here at the end of August, beginning of September. If that is not at the Bennett Retreat House in Rock Island, Illinois, which is a really beautiful retreat space, but fully decked out with Wi-Fi, everything like that. We're planning a week. We have a week set aside. If we are not at a point where the monastery that runs the Bennett Retreat House is able to welcome people to their space, we will postpone, and we will work with the selected author to find a week-long retreat time that works for both them and the retreat house. You can check that out online. We will be very soon, we'll be announcing our complete faculty for the David R. Collins Writers Conference. We are hoping to have registration up April 1st. Our keynote, which we just announced last week, something like that, is the great, amazing, brilliant poet, publisher, and just like all around Hall of Fame literary citizen, Allison Joseph, who we've been really excited to work with for years. And I just can't say enough good things about her and her work, and how excited we are to welcome her. That will also be virtual, so you can attend the conference from anywhere. If you've got a computer and an internet connection, you can join us from anywhere you like. You can reach out to me for more information. That'll be up on our website soon. I think that covers most of the bases. We will be doing some readings and things like that in the Quad Cities. We might be doing some outdoor live events, which would be so wonderful. Once the weather turns, we've talked to a couple of our partners who are going to be hosting outdoor events, and we're hoping that we can do that and spread a little light that way. So check us out, www.mwcqc.org. It's like Midwest Writing Center Quadcities.org. Sarah, back to you.
Well, that's it for the talking part. Again, if you're checking out now, we hope that you write more light into your lives. I'm not going to set a timer for today, but do either of you have a prompt to leave our friends with? You don't have to. I can do it.
Oh, do it.
I'd like everyone to write something involving rollerblades. Write more light into your life, folks. Have a great day.